Hey folks, Michael Mann from Michael Mann Security Services. Welcome to Sri Lanka, Terrorism, and the Threat to the Church. As always, give you the information about how to contact us. You can get us at our website, michaelmannsecurityservices.com. You can call us and you're going to get Scott at 615-606-1006. The later you call Scott, the better off that the better chance you'll get of getting him. So anytime past 10 p.m. at night, he'll love it. Email Scott M. SCOTTM at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. And, of course, get us on Facebook and Instagram, which is where you are now, at Safe with Man. All right, folks, we got some stuff coming up. Let me go over this. We're waiting some other folks to jump on. We've got a class coming on Sunday. If you're on a church security team, this is the most important class you're ever going to take. You guys know I'm a weapons guy, gun guy. 30 plus years of anti-terrorism, SWAT, protecting nuclear sites, people. This is what protects your church, not the guns, not the response. The Israeli security concept, it is literally a virtual instructor-led platform on Zoom this Sunday, June 14th, from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. It is on Eventbrite. It is also on our webpage. $60. You register, you get the link. We'll see you Sunday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is what prevents attacks. This is what's going to protect your church, and we're going to talk about that in this presentation. All right? We're going to cover behavioral-based threat detection techniques versus profiling. We do not profile in threat assessments. Concepts in preventative security, physical security design for churches, attack methodology detection, and suspicious item identification and response. This is part one. This is how you see the threat early. That's what all this is about if you've been watching me for the last 12 weeks. Okay? All right. What's next? Church Protection Specialist Certification. 3 modules. You get certified as a Church Protection Specialist. This will teach you and your team how to get out there, how to protect the church, what that looks like, a number of individual certifications, plus a certification from us. You're going to get 2-year certification as a citizen responder or rescuer, and a number of other certifications. Plus, you will get access to a video library for 6 months that covers all the skills that you're going to learn in those 3 modules. All right. If you're in Tennessee, you also, if you want it, get your unarmed guard security license or the training form for that, and your concealed carry permit. It exceeds those requirements. So if you're in the state of Tennessee, you want to come physically to one of our classes because of COVID-19, or I don't know, you just don't want to drive, then we're going to do this online. That's what this is. It's going to be on the website here shortly. Send us a message, Scott M. at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. We'll send you all the info. We've got this class coming up in a couple of weeks. We've already got people registered. I hope to see you there. Okay, expectations for today. So this is about a 30-minute webinar or presentation reviewing the process of the attack, looking at a case study. Okay, so we're going to look at the attack that happened in Sri Lanka last year, April 2019, the Easter attacks. Talk about the 6 targets. We're going to talk about the organization or organizations that conducted those attacks, what that looked like from a planning standpoint, what it means from a terrorism standpoint. The last 3 to 4 webinars, terrorism, lone wolf, physical protection, it all builds on those other webinars. So the stuff that you've seen the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, you're going to see some of the same information. This is just showing you how all that applies. Okay? Q&A at the end. We are double dipping. We are doing a lot of work tonight at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. We've got the Home Security and Defense webinar. A lot of you guys, I saw that today. You guys signed up for that also. So we're going to see you at 6 p.m. for that. So we got a lot going on tonight. That's why we're going to cut it a little bit shorter. All right? Our agenda. We're going to talk about, get past that. There we go. Just the attack process itself. All right? So we're going to talk about the attack process, go through the case study. Like always, if you have questions, we're on Facebook Live with you. Shoot those to Scott. He's sitting on the other side here. He's monitoring. He'll take those questions. He'll write them down, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation if you have those questions. If you want to wait to the end, I'll ask, do we have any questions? If we don't, we'll move on. Hope to see most of you at 6 p.m. Okay? All right. let's talk about the attack process. Let's do some review real quick. So, definition of terrorism. You guys got this from the terrorism webinar, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. An act of violence committed by a group or an individual with political, social, or religious objective or objectives. That is a definition of terrorism. All right, so let's real quick talk about if you don't know, if you've been hiding under a rock somewhere and don't know about this attack. Let me give you an overview real quick, and then we'll walk through the attack process, so you can take all this information we've been throwing at you the last couple of weeks and plug it into here, see how important it is protecting your church. All right, so April 21st, 2019. The adversary was an Islamic terrorist organization inspired by ISIS. Lots of intelligence and information out there, especially a day or two after the attack. ISIS claimed responsibility. As the investigation started to unfold, it looks like that it was ISIS inspired. There might have been some support for ISIS, but they weren't 100% responsible for the attack. 7 suicide bombers, so 6 bombers, and then the 7th was the wife of one of the bombers who ends up detonating herself when the police go into to their house to arrest them. Multiple coordinated attacks, 3 hotels, 3 churches. 300 plus killed. Every report, everything that I study on this attack, the numbers of people killed changes. Over 400 folks injured. Okay. So, real quick review of our terrorist groups or classifications. We talked about this again a couple of weeks ago. We have nationalist groups. We have ideological groups or terrorists. We have religio-political groups, single-issue groups, and we have state-sponsored groups. This adversary, religio-political, obviously ISIS-inspired, extremist groups made up of militant fundamental factions belonging to several major religions, such as Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, etc. This was an Islamic terrorist cell affiliated with ISIS. We're going to get into that. They had a network of 100 plus people that belonged to 2 different Islamic cells or groups that had existed in Sri Lanka for a while. We don't have time to get into this presentation, but if you'll go back and you look at the history, very specifically of guerrilla warfare in Sri Lanka, we'll talk a little bit about it. Tamil Tigers, or LTTE, was a guerrilla group that existed for many years. I think they were formed in 1976, fought the Sri Lankan government for many, many years. They didn't make up suicide bombing, but they actually perfected the practice of it, and they were not Muslim extremists. So very interesting history of violence with Sri Lanka, and some of the violence that we're going to talk about here, where that started and where it came from in this country. Very different than what you would think. Again, we talked about that history of violence from the Tamil Tigers or LTTE. All right, so let's just talk about the planning phase of this. The leader of this group, all right, so an Islamic extremist, Zahran Hashim, 34 years old. Now, before I get into this, some understand these attackers. Most of them were wealthy people. They came from wealthy families. These were not homeless people. These were not at-risk folks that ISIS would like, ISIS or like Hamas or Hezbollah, typical groups or typical types of people that that these groups would go out to recruit. Most of these people had money or came from money. They had jobs, and so this attack was just very, very different when we start to look at the dynamics. So Hashim was the leader. Radical Islamic preacher, and obviously a suicide bomber. Preparations, planning, and rehearsals back in 2018. We're going to talk about this. The government was the Sri Lankan government was made aware of these attacks, and then that intelligence was not disseminated out correctly. Early April 2019, again, there were warnings from the United States and other countries that these attacks were probably going to take place, and that information was not disseminated, and because of that, obviously there were some targets that were left open, and these attacks occurred. This is, so I think 2 days after the bombings, the leader and then, of course, the 6 suicide bombers, they blew themselves up. And then that 7th was the wife of one of the other attackers. When the police tried to arrest her, she actually killed herself. I think she had 3 boys in the house, and then she was also pregnant, so she killed all the children also as they came in to arrest her or get into the house to search it and take her into custody. This is the leader of the group, Hashim, right there in the middle. This was a video that was found, I think, on April 23rd, 2019, during the investigation by the Sri Lankan government, where he pledged allegiance to ISIS. All right, Types of attacks, we talked about this again last couple webinars. So some of the attacks that terrorist organizations will commit: bombings, assassinations, armed assaults, suicide bombings, barricade hostage incidents, cyber terrorism, hijackings, and so on and so on. These are bombings or suicide bombings, and so that's the type of attack, or that attack methodology that was used during these attacks. All right. So when we get into the type of attack, we talk about the bombings. If some of you have had our Israeli security concept class, you've heard this already. I think I've mentioned this on one of our webinars when we talked about suspicious items and our suspicious item identification. So remember, these folks use IEDs. They were suicide bombers. So here they had to know about the components. They had to know about they had to know what the switch would look like. They had to know exactly what the power source should be, the initiator, container, explosive. And so they had to build these, and we'll get into this, something we talked about last week with this technology wave, how that actually was implemented here and how the bombs were built, how these bombers, and especially how the mastermind of this attack put all this together. The explosive that was used, TATP, triacetone triperoxide, that is a favorite explosive used by most ISIS-led or ISIS-affiliated attackers. Main reason, I'm guessing, because it's really, really easy to make. Triacetone triperoxide is nothing more than hydrogen peroxide, acetone, and battery acid. Okay, so it's a very easy explosive to make. There are a number of IEDs that have gone off the United States to use on specific targets, and TATP has been used. So very easy to get the materials, very easy. Well, I won't say it's easy to make it. If you make one mistake, it's a self-correcting error, but obviously the materials are very, very easy to get. All right. Here, backpacks and suicide vests were used. You'll see some photos here shortly of one of the attackers with a backpack on as he walks into a church, and the wife, the female that the police tried to arrest as they went into her home, who blew herself up and killed police officers and all of her children, including the infant that were, or obviously the child that was inside of her. She actually had a suicide vest on. All right. So this is where the waves and the things that we talked about last week and the week before that, these waves of terrorism. We talked about that we are currently in this religious wave that started in 1979. So background on that, because we're talking about religious terrorism or religio-political. So remember, 1979, the religious wave started for the world, where we had the overthrow of the Iranian regime in Iran, and then we had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan also in 1979. Both of those incidents were the start of the religious terrorism wave for the world. So you had Muslims coming from all over the world coming together, very specifically to go to Afghanistan to support Muslims that because obviously Afghanistan is a Muslim country, to fight the Russian, or at the time the Soviet invaders. And then of course you had the change in the government, or the type of government in Iran in 1979, when you had obviously the radical government that took over that we have today, or that Iran has today. So that wave began in 1979. Over the last several years, what we started to experience is now this technological wave. And we'll get into that here in just a second. So here we're talking about the use of open source materials found on the internet and found on websites, found in magazines. And so we talked about this with the Lone Wolf last night. It's where the adversary can take manuals, things that they find on open source internet, things that they're shipped from terrorist organizations. They can look at those manuals and they can get ideas, or they can actually get directions on how to build very specific things like improvised explosive devices, and that is what happened in this case. They can also connect with like-minded individuals. The leader of this group, the mastermind, who pledged allegiance to ISIS, actually did connect with someone online. So it was a Syrian bomb maker who was actually killed in 2017 in Syria, but I think in 2015, 2016, made contact with the leader of this group, and he was actually coached through the process of how to do this. Maps and diagrams of targets. The adversaries in this case were also able to gather intelligence offline or online about the very specific targets. Again, 3 hotels and then 3 churches. If it's not obvious to you already, the 3 hotels, tourism, obviously large amount of tourism. These were expensive hotels, so trying to kill people that came in from outside the country. There was also at the time something going on with the government at Easter. There was a group of high-ranking government officials staying at one of the hotels, and that was another reason why the hotels were actually a target. Churches, obviously, the cross is offensive. Very specifically here to Islamic extremists, and so striking back at Christianity, so something that we've experienced for many years. All right. Background on Sri Lanka. So another reason for the attack. Again, if you go back and you look at the history, so there's not a lot of Muslims in Sri Lanka, which is again very surprising about this attack. While they believe that ISIS was basically the mastermind behind this, and it was not. A lot of years of violence against Muslims in Sri Lanka, because primarily in Sri Lanka you have Buddhists, you have some Christians, but the Muslim is the minority. And so years of violence against Muslims was another motivation for the attack behind this specific incident, or these incidents on Easter of 2019. So we talk about, when we start talking about the requirements for a successful attack, and when they collected those targets, remember there's some things we need. I talk about this all the time. You're going to hear it in home defense. We talk about burglars and home invaders trying to pick your house out or pick out your home. We need, number one, information about the target, which they received online, they received through surveillance. They need the bad guy needs the element of surprise, which they had the element of surprise because the information or intelligence was not disseminated correctly. You need to have mobility, so the adversary needs to be able to get to the target, get inside the target, and be able to move to each target that's inside to be successful. And of course, they have to have control, which means they have to have a means for the attack. And in this attack, it was improvised explosive devices. Soft targets, they appear to be undefended, and they were. Now, there was one church that was not undefended. We're going to get into that, and again, get into why the Israeli security concept and the training we're covering Sunday is so important for you folks that are protecting churches to attend. This is a good case study for that. We're going to cover it in just a second. We get into deterrence and seeing adversary activity early, even without intelligence. So 3 hotels, 3 churches, undefended, or they believe they were to be undefended, or very soft. Okay? Pre-attack indicators and intelligence here. Investigators discovered that Sri Lankan officials received detailed intel about the attacks, specifically prominent churches. That was not disseminated correctly. It was not received in time. Important for the private sector. For us as churches, remember, if you are a church protector, it is your job to protect the church, not the government. Now, I know we're talking about Sri Lanka, but let's talk about the United States for just a minute. And you are seeing this now with current events. The government cannot protect us. Number one, they can't do it. They have never been able to do it. Number two, a church is a private business. It is our job as the body to protect the church. That is our role. What is important when we look at this case study, it is very, very important to still make connections with local law enforcement resources, like your JTTFs, if they'll give you information, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces, your fusion centers, we've talked about that before. They can give open source information, very specifically to the private sector, to protectors like you and me. Now, again, that information may be limited, because depending on who we're getting that information from, it may be classified, which means it can't be or at least it's restricted, so it can't be disseminated to the public. But there is information and training that you can get from those organizations. But remember, it is our responsibility to protect the church. We can get intelligence and information from law enforcement organizations, but it is not their job to protect us. In fact, law enforcement organizations, because that's not their job, don't protect, they respond, but we can get good information from them, okay? All right, so prevention and response. So here's what happened with the church. We start talking about recognition of suspicious activity. So one of the attackers targeted Mary's Cathedral just outside of the capital of Sri Lanka. But the service had already ended by the time that the suicide bomber had got there. So either really bad pre-attack surveillance, or he was running behind for whatever reason. Now, what's amazing, these coordinated attacks, these 6 attacks at once, or they were just, just right after each other, caused a lot of death, a lot of confusion. But again, in this case, something happened where he was either slowed down or there was some bad intel on what time the service started. So he walked to the Zion church, so a church nearby, a Protestant church, to detonate his bomb. When he attempted to enter, there were some church officials outside that noticed him and thought he looked suspicious. Now again, going back to the history of Sri Lanka, as they fought for many, many years, since like 1976, fighting guerrillas like the Tamil Tigers, more than likely people, and probably these folks who were at the church that day, grew up understanding what tactics and what attack methodology looked like. They saw something suspicious. They actually went up to him, stopped him from going inside, and because they did that, he had to detonate the bomb outside. Very similar to what happened in one of the videos, the Israeli video I showed you of the mall attack in Netanya, Israel, where there was the unarmed guards like kind of leaning against the barrier outside, sees the suicide bomber walking up, identifies that suspicious behavior, goes to approach the suicide bomber. It psychologically impacts the bomber's motivation to attack. He tries to leave. The police corner him around the corner of the mall, and again, he detonates outside, but instead of killing 300 or 400 people in the mall, I think kills 6 or 7 outside. Same here. Wasn't able to get inside because someone picked up something that didn't look right. They confronted him. He went around the corner. He did end up killing 14 children. They were eating breakfast outside the church, but the people inside the church, the hundreds or however many people were in there, were not murdered or killed because someone outside just happened to notice something. This is prevention. This is what we do. Again, we are going to teach you to do that on Sunday, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Comes from 3 places. What I learned in studying in Israel, what I've learned conducting protection operations for high net worth individuals, and other tactics and other methodologies that I've learned conducting anti-terrorism operations for the last 32 years. This is what prevented people from getting killed. Just somebody outside watching, seeing something suspicious, and asking a question. Okay. All right. So just very quick, we're right at 30 minutes. I wanted to run through this because we have a second webinar that is a quick study. There are a number of open source documents where you can go in and you can read about this attack. All of them kind of say something different about the victims, about the number of victims, about methodologies, and a lot of this probably just is not open because it's coming from other countries, so some of this stuff is hard to read through. But there's a lot of good stuff out there. I would specifically, if I were you, go back, look at the history of Sri Lanka, because as you learn about that country, and learn about the culture, a lot of things about this attack, just strange, just some things that we would not expect. All right, again, Israeli security concept, like going back to what happened at the Zion Church, we're going to teach you how to do this on Sunday. We hope to see everybody there on Sunday from 1 p.m. Central Standard Time to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. Scott, do we have any questions from our wonderful audience? Nothing. Hey, send us an email at scottm@michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Give Scott a call, 615-606-1006. He loves to hear from you. Go to michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Look at our training events coming up, including our Church Protection Specialist certification. That's in July. We've already had people sign up for that. We hope to see you there, and obviously you're at Safe with Man on Facebook now. Hey, folks, thanks again for coming. We love you. We're praying for you. If you are standing post at your church on Sundays now, so if you guys are opened up, be safe. If you have questions about protection, email me. Email us. Email the security experts. We'll answer any questions that you have. And again, thanks for coming as always. I think this is webinar number 11. We're going to hit number 12 here in about an hour and a half. Again, we love you. We're praying for you. Be careful as you protect your churches. And remember, folks, it is about prevention, not response.